Here we are, Sunday, June 26th, 2022. I'm Larissa, and we are reading Luck of the Draw, an original work of fiction by me. Chapter 3, The Hair Down There. Amy lifted her head from her pillow ever so slightly and squinted her eyes. The sunlight coming through her window seemed unnaturally bright. It hurt her head. She lifted her right hand to her forehead to shield her eyes and noticed she was still wearing her clothes from the day before, and that was very strange. She lifted the blankets over her head and looked at her legs. Yes, she was still dressed from the day before. Black long-sleeve t-shirt, black maxi skirt, and belt. At least she had taken her shoes off before getting in bed, but something didn't seem right. Her head hurt like she had been out for a few days drinking, if that was something she ever did, which it wasn't. Seriously, though, she felt strange, disoriented, and sore all over. She flung the covers from her head and saw her purse on the floor in the corner, also strange. She usually hung it on the hook by her bedroom door at night. She tried to sit up and found she was quite woozy. Closing her eyes, she willed the contents of her stomach to settle. With her eyes still closed, she reached out to her nightstand, looking for her cell phone, which usually sat plugged in to charge next to the box of tissues. It wasn't there. Once again, she opened her eyes and slowly eased herself upright in bed. The room started to shift, as if it might spin, but she stuck her pinkies in her ears and swallowed hard. That seemed to adjust whatever was amiss with her inner ear. She opened her eyes and allowed her pupils to adjust. For a couple seconds, all she could see was a big glowing green dot in the center of her vision. Slowly, the room came into focus as her eyes adjusted. It struck her then. Liza wasn't there next to her. Her kitty Liza was always right next to her, especially at bedtime. "Liza, kitty cat," Amy croaked. Her throat seemed affected by the mystery affliction as well. It was dry and sore, as if she had been screaming. There was no response from Liza. Her bedroom door was closed and locked from the inside, another strange fact. Amy never locked her bedroom door. That would be silly. She lived alone in a space that wasn't quite 500 square feet. Now she was frightened. Everything was still and seemed quiet in the apartment. She felt alone, but she wasn't sure if that was true or not. When she swung her legs over the side of the bed, she felt a sharp pain in her left hip. Feet dangling off the bed just a couple inches from the floor, she peeled down her skirt over her hip from the top. The stretchy t-shirt material gave way, revealing a huge purplish welt with two infected-looking puncture wounds just behind the top crest of her pelvic bone. She lightly touched the area around the wounds and winced, finding it both tender and hot to the touch. Replacing the top of her skirt and planting her feet on the cold floor, she slowly stood up. Her joints ached under her average weight. Her hip felt like it was on fire, and when she moved to walk, it felt as though a thick blade was lodged in the joint. Limping heavily, she made it to her purse, slumped in the corner. Bending carefully, she picked it up and limped back to her bed. Once again, situated on the tussled sheets, she saw a streak of blood she assumed had come from the wound on her hip. She dumped the contents of her purse out on the bed in front of her. Wallet, keys, lip balm, a wad of gum wrapped in an old receipt, hand lotion, 2 pens, a quarter, tampon, brush, pepper spray, her cards, and her phone. What was missing? Her tablet, the pouch with her bottle of holy water, and grandmother's church headscarf, and her client book. She opened the wallet to find everything there except the business card with Officer Juno's contact information. She picked up the phone and was relieved it still had 30% charge, but was terrified to see it was Tuesday morning. Last she remembered, it was late Saturday afternoon, and she locked up her office, said goodbye to Juno and the 2 men officers who came to dust her office for prints, and was heading back to her car to go home, but she didn't remember actually getting in her car or driving home. And now it was 10 a.m. on Tuesday. She remembered she had a client scheduled on Monday. Someone must have missed her. She opened the call feature of her phone and looked at the history. Nothing outgoing since Saturday morning, but there were 3 incoming with 2 messages. The last 2 calls were from Danica, her Monday appointment. Danica left an angry message on the last call, but the first incoming call was late Saturday evening and was from an unknown number, and they left a message. Hesitantly, Amy pressed the play option and held up the phone to her ear to listen. It was a strangely halting man's voice. "Darling Amy, If you are listening to this, you must have woken up, but trust me when I tell you, I have not held my breath waiting for you to do so, and I'll be very impressed should you wake at all. Your answers were quite unacceptable, and so I have taken your client book and will look for what I need myself without your help. Your kitty didn't stick around to help you out. She ran down the hall in case you're looking for her. Ciao, sweetie. I'll be back to check on you mañana. Amy dropped the phone, shaking. She looked around the room and saw everything else around her looked in place. They had come back on Sunday to check on her? Had they assumed she was dead? Did she lock her bedroom door? Was Liza okay? Why hadn't any of her neighbors noticed anything? Any other day, Mrs. Dwyer across the hall was so nosy it verged on harassment. Amy picked up the phone and cleared her throat. She found that as long as she whispered, she could talk without a problem. She opened her contacts and looked for Tubbs. The number she had for him was his direct cell phone. She knew she was the only one in the building besides Doug who had it. Tubbs had told her so the day they hung the glass shelves. She and Doug were the only people in the building Tubbs didn't think were crazy. Everyone else had to call Ed to get Tubbs. She pressed the send button. It rang twice. "Hello, Tubbs." Tubbs answered. "Tubbs, it's me, Amy," Amy whispered. "What's that, Amy? I can hardly hear you. Speak up." "I can't, Tubbs. I don't know what's wrong. This is as loud as I can talk right now, please." "Amy, are you okay? Do you need me to fix something? I'm down at Maggie's right now." No, Tubbs, I don't know what to do. Don't say anything to Maggie, please. I don't know what happened. I'm so scared." Tubbs now interrupted her. "Amy, slow down. Hold on, I'm stepping outside." Amy could hear Maggie protesting in the background as Tubbs explained he would be right back. "Amy, where are you? What's the problem? You know you had an angry woman here yesterday pounding on your door and the doors of everyone else in the building. She said she had an appointment. Are you okay?" "No, Tubbs, I'm not okay." "Where are you?" "I'm at home, but it's not so simple. I just woke up." "What do you mean you just woke up?" "I mean, last I remember, it was Saturday evening and I was heading home. Now it's Tuesday morning." Amy tried to shriek, but only a squeak came out. Amy could audibly hear Tubbs gasp on the other end of the line. "Amy, where are you?" "I told you, I'm at home, but I'm afraid to leave my room. It's all so strange, and I'm scared. Tubbs, I'm really scared." "Well, why don't you call that Officer Juno? Because they took his card and they took some other things too." "They? Who's they?" Tubbs asked. "I don't know, Tubbs. I think they hurt me. I think they tried to kill me. I think they think I'm dead." "What, Amy? I don't understand. What do you want me to do?" "I don't know, Tubbs. I don't know. Can you come over?" "Amy, I don't even know where you live. Do you think you should call the police?" "Tubbs, I'm scared. They left a message on Sunday evening after they did whatever they did. I don't know what to do. Liza, my cat, is missing, and I don't know what has happened to me for the past almost 3 days. Amy was breathing hard, and tears were falling down her cheeks silently. Tubbs was beside himself. "Amy, what's your address?" "You know where the Sunnyvale Community Center is?" "Yeah." "I live in the complex right behind the senior building, between there and the houses." "Okay, I'm going to call Juno and see if he'll meet me there." "Juno has the address. I gave it to him last night. I mean Saturday evening before I went to my car. Tubbs, I don't even know if my car is here." "Well, it's not at the office, front or back, I can tell you that much," Tubbs told her frantically. "Now I'm going to hang up, but you hang in there, Amy. Don't leave the room and don't let anyone in." Tubbs hung up the phone and Amy flopped back on her pillow. Her mouth was really dry and there was a terrible metallic taste like she'd been sucking on rusty nails. She got up and spied herself in the dresser mirror. The corners of her mouth were crusted with what appeared to be blood, and she had a cut over her right eye. Her T-shirt was torn at the neck, and there was something dried on the back of the shirt. She decided to not change anything, so Juno would see it all if and when he got there. Suddenly, Amy was hit by the urgent and overwhelming need to urinate. Instinctively, she doubled over and grabbed at her crotch and immediately wished she hadn't. She winced in pain. It felt as if she had been beaten between her legs. Amy was afraid to look, but also knew it was important to pee into something and save it. A formerly regular client had been the survivor of a particularly horrible assault situation and had told her part of the reason they weren't able to put the guy away who had done it was because after he was done with her, he took her home and dropped her off, and instead of calling the police immediately, she had taken a shower and washed herself. She had scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed, trying to gain distance between herself and the assault. She scrubbed so well that they didn't have any DNA to convict the monster, and his attorney convinced the jury it was a simple case of unfortunate mistaken identity. 6 months after the trial ended, the guy did almost the exact same thing to another woman who looked eerily similar to Amy's client, but this time he killed the woman. That woman's husband came home as the monster was washing his hands in their kitchen sink and killed him with his bare hands. Ironically, the hero husband was now serving a 5-year sentence for killing the monster who raped and killed his wife in their kitchen. All of this now bounced around inside Amy's throbbing head. She went to the bathroom that adjoined her bedroom, making it a master suite. The medicine cabinet was open, and a bottle of Percocet that she had been prescribed when she broke her ankle a couple years back was empty, with the lid missing. The bottle had been nearly full. She dug through the cabinet looking for something else she could pee into. Finding nothing suitable, she opened the cupboard under the sink and behind a box of pregnancy tests found an actual specimen cup, sealed and still sterile. A couple of years ago, she had been dating Kevin Turley, and things had been pretty serious. They had even started trying to have a baby, but when Amy pressed him about getting married, Kevin freaked out. A week after the blow-up fight, he up and moved to New York. Amy turned up pregnant a few weeks after that and never told him. She had the pregnancy terminated and told the doctor she had no idea who the father was. It was a lie. Kevin was the only guy she had been sleeping with. In fact, she hadn't had sex with anyone since. After the abortion, she was kind of turned off dating and decided to let God decide when Mr. Right came along. She was done looking. 6 months ago, she heard Kevin married a woman Amy had once considered a friend. Amy harbored no jealousy or bitterness. Quite the opposite. She thought the two deserved each other. Both were shallow and impulsive. All of these memories rolled around in her mind as she now held the sterile specimen cup before her face triumphantly. Quickly, she hiked up her skirt and pulled at her panties and squatted over the toilet to pee in the cup. She saw the blood in the cup before lifting the skirt more to reveal her badly beaten-up-looking genitalia. It looked as though they had pulled the hair from her labia and pubis. Tufts were left around the edges at her bikini line. There was a cut running along the inner part of the outer labia. The whole area was swollen and bruised-looking. She gently pat herself dry with a wad of toilet paper and sat the cup on the edge of the sink along with a wad of toilet paper. Then she sat back onto the toilet and cried, heaving sobs, each one sending a shot of pain through her abdomen. After a short time, she covered the specimen cup, leaving it in the bathroom, then gathered herself and laid back down on the bed. She closed her eyes for what seemed like just a moment when she heard the sound of Juno and Tubbs calling from outside the locked bedroom door. "Amy, it's Officer Juno." "And Tubbs, too." "Amy, are you in there?" Amy rolled over and croaked to the two men. "Yes, I'm here. Hold on. Let me unlock the door." Amy stood up and had to steady herself against the wall. She limped around the bed and over the door. As she opened the door, Tubbs inhaled sharply at the sight of Amy in such disarray. Juno showed no emotion. Amy could see things were a mess behind them in the rest of her apartment. Thankfully, Liza jumped up onto the dining table and meowed to let Amy know she was back and safe. Amy opened the bedroom door wide and pushed past Juno and Tubbs toward Liza and scooped the tiny tabby up in her arms. "Oh, Liza, Mummy's so glad you are safe and sound. Let me get you some food." "Really, Amy, do you think that can wait?" Juno asked her. Amy swung around and looked at him, holding the kitty close to her heart. Liza was rubbing her head hard and deep into Mummy's chest, purring, happy she was okay. "Look, I haven't fed my kitty since Saturday morning. I'm glad you're here, but please, try to put yourself in my shoes." Juno and Tubbs both instinctively looked to Amy's feet, which were bare, except for some dried blood dripping over the left big toe and ankle. "Amy, I think we should call the paramedics. You need medical attention." "I need to feed my kitty, and yes, I need medical attention. I don't even want to tell you what I found so far, and I'm not looking forward to learning the extent of what they've done to me." Tubbs began to cry. Silent tears ran down his face and dripped from his chin. Juno looked away embarrassed. "Okay, feed the cat, but I'm calling for an ambulance." "Seriously, you don't need to do that. I can drive myself to the emergency room if that's where we're going, but don't you want to look around here first? Don't you want to hear what happened?" Amy asked, placing Liza back on the table and looking for her dish on the floor. She found it in the corner where it always was. She picked up the shallow dish and carried it back into the small kitchen and placed it on the counter. The kitchen had been left untouched. In the living room, the TV was on the floor with the screen shattered and the drapes were pulled from the sliding glass door and were strewn all over the couch. Amy found a can of wet food in the cupboard and pulled the tab to open it. She dug around for a fork from a nearby drawer and scooped a generous serving from the can, mashed it down on the dish with the back of the fork. Then she placed a plastic lid over the open can and put it back in the refrigerator. Liza was meowing like crazy, running back and forth between the kitchen and the corner where her water dish was still sitting. Amy put the food dish down and Liza began to eat ferociously. Amy picked up the water dish and filled it with fresh water for the hungry kitty before turning towards Officer Juneau and Tubbs, who were up to this point just watching her go back and forth with the dishes for the cat. "Well, don't you?" she asked them again. Yes, Amy, please tell me what happened," Juneau asked softly. Amy pulled the chair out from the small dining table and eased herself onto it. Sitting was uncomfortable, and the longer she was awake, the more her body hurt. Juneau pulled out the opposite chair and sat down. Tubbs perched himself on the edge of an overstuffed armchair next to the couch in the living room just beyond the dining table. "I don't really know what all happened. The last thing I remember is walking to my car after you guys were done at my office Saturday evening," Amy began. Juneau was digging in a pocket looking for a pen to take notes. "After that, I woke up here just before 10. My head hurt. It still does. Everything hurts. But when I woke up, the light hurt my eyes. I was still wearing the clothes I have on now, the same clothes from Saturday, and I have some horrible," Amy struggled for the right word, "wounds." She finished. Juneau looked up at her with sympathy. "What kind of wounds, Amy?" he asked gently. "I have a giant welt on the left cheek of my ass with what looks like 2 puncture wounds, like they stuck nails in me or something. I think they're infected. They're hot to the touch. And then there's the blood in the corners of my mouth and the cut on my head and my..." Amy began to sob. Juneau was at a loss. Tubbs ran to Amy's side and wrapped his arms around her. Amy was a little surprised but grateful. She needed a hug and some gentle affection. She let herself sink back into Tubbs' chest as she sobbed, and he lightly rubbed her back. "Amy, there's something on your back. It's all dried." Tubbs inspected the palm of his hand, sniffing it. "I think it's semen." Tubbs assessed and told Juneau. Amy spoke with her face still buried in Tubbs' chest. "I wouldn't be surprised. My hair is gone. They pulled out my hair, and I've been cut." Tubbs held her tighter while her words settled into Juneau's ears. What hair?" the clueless officer asked. The hair down there." Amy pointed between her legs without looking at Juneau. Tubbs smoothed the hair on top of Amy's head. Amy pulled away from Tubbs, who lightly touched her cheek, and went to the kitchen to find a glass of water for the violated woman. Amy wiped under her nose with the back of her hand and noticed a cut on the side of her hand running up the side of her arm. It looked similar to the cut along her labia. "I think they raped me. I had to pee. I had a specimen cup under my sink. I have it in the bathroom with the paper I wiped with. There's probably more. I haven't taken my clothes off yet. And they left me a voicemail." Juneau dropped his pen on the table and looked at Amy, marveling that the woman was alive. "They did what?" he asked, half seriously, half rhetorically. "They left a message. I can play it for you. I don't think they thought I was going to make it. I think they thought I was dead." Amy got up and went to the bedroom to get her cell phone, which she had left on her nightstand to charge. When she came back out, Liza was sitting in Tubbs' lap, getting a massage. Amy put the phone on speaker and played the message. Juneau shook his head. "And the number came up unknown?" "Yes," Amy replied. "Well, depending on how they manage that, we may or may not be able to find where they were calling from. It sounded like they used something to alter the sound of their voice. At least we know they, in fact, were trying to kill you. That might help me get some resources on the case." "So they took your client book. Did they take anything else?" "My tablet is gone. Other than that, I don't know. I haven't looked around. I only came out of my room when you got here. Was the door open?" Not open, but unlocked," Tubb answered her. Amy nodded at him. "Oh, and I don't know if they took it, but there was something else missing from my purse." "Oh, what's that?" Juneau asked. "It's really strange. I don't know what they'd want it for. It's nothing unless you're family. I had a little pouch in my purse that I got from my grandmother. It was an old jewelry pouch, but it didn't have jewelry in it." "Well, they didn't know that." "Yeah, well, it would have been easy to tell, even without opening it." "What was in it, then?" "It was a bottle of holy water from the Vatican, blessed by John Paul, and a silk head covering for church. It was my grandmother's. She gave me the pouch with the water and the scarf on her deathbed. She told me to never enter her church without my head covered what? Well, I haven't told you everything about my work." "Are you an escort, Miss Gonder?" "What?" Amy was disgusted. "Absolutely not." The recent memory of Kevin made her laugh, and this scared Juneau, who now shifted uncomfortably in front of Amy. "We're not all like that, you know." She spat at him. I know, I'm sorry. No, you're not. You don't even know what you've just asked, what you've just said to me, or why that's absurd. There's no way I could do the work I do and be a whore. I told you, I'm sorry. Please continue. What haven't you told me about your work? Well, I clear spaces. Juno shook his head back and forth. And just what does that mean, you clear spaces? Tubbs smiled and chuckled lightly under his breath. He had suspected, but hadn't known for sure until just now. Tubbs had a second cousin in the same line of work as Amy down in the Florida Panhandle. Ghosts, spirits, demons. I get them to leave people's houses, cars, barns, whatever. The holy water is for the tough cases, for demons or other malignant beings, Amy said flatly. Juno stared at her without blinking. He didn't know what to say or believe. I guess you could call me a ghostbuster, Amy finished. Juno brushed imaginary hair back from his brow and scratched the top of his head before making another note on his clipboard. Okay, so they took your holy water? Juno asked. I don't know, I guess they did, but I have no idea how I got home, let alone what or who took or did what. I'm guessing they drugged me, but you're the cop, you figure it out. Amy began to cry again. Tubbs looked at Amy with sincere concern. He had a daughter just a few years younger than Amy. They had been estranged for the past 10 years. Fatherly emotions were being triggered in his heart, and all he wanted to do was find who did this to Amy and beat the shit out of them. Amy, can I drive you to the emergency room? Tubbs offered. That's a very good idea, Juno added. The sooner the better. Go get your specimen and gather your things. Let's go. Juno made a couple last notes and gestured towards the door with his head. Amy got up and got her purse, then looked for the shoes she'd been wearing last night. They were nowhere in the apartment to be found. My shoes are gone, she told Juno. Okay, I'll add them to the list. Get another pair and let's go. Amy went back into the bedroom and dug around in her closet until she found a pair of foam flip-flops and slid her tiny feet in them. She picked up the specimen and wad of paper and emerged back in the living room where Tubbs was waiting, standing next to the couch. Liza was standing on the cushion next to him, letting him rub her ears. Juno was standing just outside the door, talking to nosy Widow Dwyer. Amy approached Tubbs, who wrapped his arm around her shoulder and ushered her towards the door. Amy bent down and kissed Liza on the head, telling her Mummy will be home soon and will clean all this mess up. Then she darted into the kitchen and grabbed a Ziploc bag, placing the cup and toilet paper inside before locking the door and following Tubbs past Juno and the old nosy widow down to his Silverado. Amy saw her car parked a few spots away and noticed a crack in the windshield. Juno followed shortly and approached Tubbs' window. He rolled it down to speak to the officer. Meet me at El Camino Hospital. Juno asked Tubbs. Yeah, I'll follow you. Great. Juno turned away from Amy and Tubbs and patted the hood of the truck as he walked toward his car. Chapter 4. A Small Discrepancy. Doug rubbed his soapy hands as vigorously as he could under the hot water, splashing out of his bathroom spigot. Eberly was downstairs in the living room of the townhouse, oblivious to any of the events of the past 24 hours. Sweetums, can you please hurry? Stephanie and Jack have been waiting at Buca for 20 minutes already. They told them they won't seat them until we get there, Eberly whined loudly from the bottom of the stairs. Doug pumped another blob of soap into his palm and scrubbed again, this time scrubbing up his forearms and getting the edge of the cuffed sleeve of his chambray shirt wet. He splashed some water over his face, rubbed his index finger over his front teeth, and blotted his face and arms dry with a towel he had used the night before after his shower. He felt dirty, like the first time he had given a blowjob to Father DeMarcus in the sacristy the week after his first communion. I'm coming, babe. I know, we're late. Doug's voice was warbled a little. He cleared his throat as he unrolled his sleeves, buttoning them at his wrists, and tucked a loose shirt tail into his pleated wide wale corduroy trousers. He took one last look at his reflection before bounding down the stairs, trying desperately to act as if nothing of the past 24 hours had transpired. Stuart stood in the front door and promptly coughed up a hairball as Doug hit the bottom stair. Eberly gasped in an exasperated fashion. Really, Stu Pie? I'd never wear trousers cut like that either, but that's a bit much, don't you think? Eberly moved toward the kitchen to get something to wipe up the mess. Doug stopped him with a motion of his hand. Eberly, just leave it. Like you said, we're already late, and who knows how long it's been since Jack's last feed. Eberly raised a waxed eyebrow at his lover and pursed his lips. I told you to knock it off with the passive-aggressive fat bashing, Eberly chided Doug. Doug rolled his eyes and threw his hands in the air. Are you kidding? The last time we met them at Buca for lunch, his tab alone was over $100. He ate 2 appetizers by himself, along with soup, salad, entree, and dessert, not to even mention the beer. I love Stephanie, Eb, but she could do much better than Jack. Jack is a glutton, and it's not like his brains make up for things. Eberly walked into the kitchen and grabbed a roll of paper towel and bottle of 409 from the counter and proceeded to bend over to wipe the cat vomit up from the slate floor of the foyer in an exaggerated manner. As he sprayed the smeared floor with 409, he spoke softly and evenly to Doug. Lover, just because I let you tear up my ass doesn't mean I'm going to allow you to tear up my family. I love Stephanie, and Jack is a very tender soul under all that flub. And most importantly, he loves Stephanie. Love is love, no? Eb stood up, holding the soiled paper towels away from his body between an index finger and thumb, with the roll under his arm and the 409 in his other hand. He disappeared into the kitchen. Doug heard the cabinet open and shut, where the garbage was stowed, and the water run into the sink while Eberly washed his graceful hands. Doug's shoulders slumped as he stood in front of the door waiting. He looked across at the opposite wall and could see himself in the gilt mirror that used to hang in his mother's sitting room. He looked old and foreign to himself, entirely changed from the person he had been the morning before. Eberly emerged from the kitchen with a small smile on his lips, pleased with himself as he saw Doug examining his reflection while waiting for him. Let's go, Eberly said as he snatched Doug's keys from the coffee table and handed them to him while reaching around for the doorknob. Doug took the keys and patted his back pocket, finding his wallet where it belonged. Eberly gave him a quick peck on the cheek as he turned the doorknob and opened the door. Doug just sighed, moving aside for Eberly to exit before him. As he locked the door behind them, he spoke softly to Eberly. You're right, I'm a monster for saying anything. Eberly cackled. I wouldn't go that far, but yeah, you need to be careful with that, sugar. You've been collecting a bit of extra padding yourself these days, he informed Doug, patting his right side just above his belt. Doug winced. He was aware. I know. I need to start running again. These days, Doug could be found most Saturdays walking at Shoreline, but he used to run. He wasn't sure why he had stopped running. He told himself something about taking time to smell the roses, but really he was just being lazy. As far as he was concerned, no one in the Bay Area had any excuse for having any amount of excess body fat. Weather like that was made for the thin and beautiful, and Doug loved thin and beautiful. Eberly never exercised, but somehow remained svelte and firm no matter how many glasses of Merlot he sipped in the evenings. Doug opened the passenger side door for his escape for Eberly, and had a moment of panic seeing the 2 coffee cups in the center console. He had totally forgotten to throw them away in his hurry to get in his house after his escapades the day before. Now they sat there, one empty and one half full, screaming his deeds for all to hear, or so that was how he felt. He knew Eberly was going to ask about them. Eberly situated himself in the seat and buckled up as Doug closed the door behind him and made his way around to the driver's side. Eberly was silent as Doug closed his door and secured his own seatbelt. It wasn't until they pulled out of the driveway down the street and onto Evelyn Avenue that he said anything. So who were you sipping lattes with in your car, Dr. Spears? No one. They're both mine, Doug lied. Eberly picked up the 2 cups and stiffed them. He knew it was a lie. No, they're not. The empty one is yours. It was a chai latte, but this one that's still half full, this one is hazelnut, and you hate hazelnut. So who's the bitch? Doug quickly glimpsed Eberly to his side and looked back to the road in front of him. She's not a bitch. It was a woman from my office building, Doug said, wishing he had some better story than the truth. Eberly looked relieved. Oh. Well, as long as it's an actual bitch with an actual vajayjay and not some cheap twink, I don't care who you have coffee with. Why didn't you just say so? Which bitch from your office? Not that horrid screeching dyke Maggie, was it? Doug relaxed a little. Eberly had no clue, even though Doug felt like what he had done was written all over his face and hands and windshield. Eberly put the cups back down in the console. Yeah, it was Maggie. She needed a ride to pick up some shelves for her space because all she has is that Lesbo cycle moped. We stopped and grabbed some caffeine so I could get through the afternoon, Doug lied. He hated Maggie and wouldn't have helped her even if she were drowning. Eberly laughed. OMG, why do lesbians insist on riding those stupid things? Get something with a trunk already. Get a Subaru like all the carpet munchers up north. Eberly continued smiling at Doug, who was grimacing. What's wrong, Boo? You suddenly love lesbians or something? Doug didn't realize his emotions were reading on his face and tried to force a smile. No, I'm just embarrassed about being so late for brunch. I might as well order lunch when we get there. You know, Eb, Maggie's not a lesbian. She just looks like one. And rides a moped, Eberly laughed. Maggie wasn't a lesbian, but she wasn't sought after much by men either. Maggie was kind of a sexless child woman. Doug found her to be obnoxiously petulant. Everyone except her fan club of clients seemed to feel the same way. 2 years ago, Ed Shoup had thrown a holiday party for all his tenants from all his properties at Tao Tao. Maggie had surprised everyone by showing up with a date, an extremely feminine guy, at least 15 years younger than the 50-something pumpkin-shaped woman. Eberly hadn't been able to make it to the event and couldn't believe it when Doug told him about it. Eberly insisted her date must have been a trans or a baby butch. Dutch hadn't thought so, but it wasn't any of his business, so he just dropped the matter and let Eberly think whatever he wanted. Eberly was like that. Once an idea was set in his head, there was no changing his mind. Doug had learned from Maggie a few weeks after the party that her date was in fact a young man she had met while giving a lecture to a cohort of students from some shitty massage school. She had broken things off after only a couple dates because she said he was hung up on the age difference, even though she was positive they had been partners in multiple lives before this one. The only reason Doug had listened to her babble was because he was waiting for his lunch to heat up in the toaster oven in the shared kitchen. Doug glanced down at the 2 coffee cups on the console and rolled down his window. He picked up the half-full cup and tossed the liquid out the window. It splattered down the side of the vehicle. What'd you do that for? Eb asked. The hazelnut smell was turning my stomach. It was a lie. Doug's sense of smell stunk. He was just feeling guilty and didn't want Eberly to somehow figure out what was actually in that cup. Amy's lipstick mark was still faint on the lip of the cup. Are you feeling all right, lover? Should we just call off brunch? We don't have to go if you aren't feeling well. Eberly was genuinely concerned. Doug didn't look well. There were circles under his normally bright eyes, and a cloud of dis-ease seemed to be hovering around him. No, it's okay, I'm fine. I just slept funny is all. Doug had hardly slept at all. He was still in bed when Eberly had let himself in with his key that morning with a vase of sunflowers, kombucha, and some weird vegan chocolate coconut ball things. Doug had forgotten all about brunch with Stephanie and Jack in the fervor of the day before and had barely slept, thinking about the look on Amy's face when Mike had smacked her down on her windshield. Doug had helped carry her into her apartment. He had no idea what all they did to her after that. He hadn't stuck around to find out. After Doug left his office the day before, he had come home and laid down on the couch with Stuart stretched across his stomach, purring, trying to relax. He had just started to nod off when his front door opened and the 2 men from earlier in the day sauntered into his living room. They had used a credit card to open the door. Doug was surprised that was all it had taken to open the heavy door. The 2 men had closed the door behind them calmly and sat down in the chairs situated to either side of the couch as if they were all old friends. Doug pressed himself up into a seated position. This time Mike introduced himself and Oleg by first name. Oleg was his cousin, and Casey Rozanova was Oleg's wife, or so Mike told Doug. In actuality, Oleg was Mike's second cousin by marriage, but he was also a pimp, and he'd been trying to commodify Casey since shortly after she had moved out west. But they didn't bother to explain this to Doug. Mike called Casey Oleg's wife. Casey was actually in the process of getting a divorce from a man on the East Coast who her parents had arranged for her to marry. She'd only just mentioned this to Doug in their last session. He assumed Oleg was this man, but Casey had said her husband's name was Gregory, not Oleg, a small discrepancy. Doug simply thought Casey had lied. He had no idea the extent of the malignancy sitting before him, nor did he have any idea how much of the malignancy he was becoming himself. Mike explained that he needed some information from Amy, but that she was not cooperative. He explained that the cops were at her office right now and that Amy was napping in her car waiting for the cops to be done. Then he handed Doug a small bag filled with a fine white powder. He instructed him to get a couple cups of coffee and wait until the police were leaving, then put the powder in one of the cups of coffee and offer it to Amy as a kindness. Doug was adverse to the idea at first, but Mike and Oleg were quite persuasive. Evidently, Galina's gentleman friend was also an associate of these two thugs. They promised that as long as he did as they instructed him and didn't call the cops, that Galina would continue to enjoy her weekend and arrive home safely Monday evening. They said to keep Amy in the parking lot until they got there. Mike handed Doug a small walkie-talkie and told him to use it to call him once he had purchased the coffee. Doug took the device and agreed, and the two men left his home as easily as they had entered. Stuart had run to his dish and scarfed the crunchies remaining from the morning, and then proceeded to vomit them up in front of the chair where Mike had been sitting. That's why the 409 was still on the counter when Eberly cleaned up the hairball. After Mike and Oleg left and he cleaned up Stuart's mess, Doug did as he was told. He drove back to his office and saw Amy napping in her car parked out front of the building. He saw the police were still in her space, moving about. He parked his car in the parking lot across the street and waited until the police were coming out of Amy's office and heading for her parked car. There is a small drive-up coffee kiosk in the parking lot across the street where Doug was waiting. He drove up and ordered the chai latte and the hazelnut latte. One time Amy had gotten coffee for the two of them. He remembered that was what she had ordered. He dumped the baggie of powder into the drink and then drove over and parked next to Amy's car. The police were getting in their cars and pulling out of the parking lot. Amy was in her office. Doug pulled out the walkie-talkie and pressed the button. Mike had answered him. Doug told him he was going to offer Amy the coffee, and the cops were gone. Mike told him they wouldn't be long. Doug tucked the walkie-talkie in the console and then mounted the stairs with the hot beverages in hand. As he reached the top of the stairs, Amy was just passing Doug's door. All night, Doug had played the interaction over and over in his mind. "Hey, Amy." "Oh, hi, Doug. How are you?" "Oh, I'm okay, but I hear you've had a rough day." Then he had extended his right hand with the drugged hazelnut latte in Amy's direction. "Thought you might like a cup of something hot." Amy smiled and had taken the coffee graciously. "Thanks, Doug. Hey, I heard about your weirdo client trying to break in. Tubbs said you paid for one of the cameras in the back hall." Yeah, there's no accounting for folks these days, especially crazy people." Amy had laughed and taken a sip of her latte. Doug didn't know what to expect. He didn't know if she was going to pass out or what. He had no idea what the powder was. Amy looked quizzically into the cup, and Doug got scared for a second. "What's wrong? Isn't it good?" he asked her. "No, it's fine. I think they added more syrup than usual, that's all. It's a little sweeter than normal. Thanks for the coffee. I really need to get home, though. It's been a long day, and I just want to take a shower and crawl in bed with a book or something." Amy brushed past Doug, who could see Mike and Oleg were already parked next to his car in such a way that it was blocking in Amy's car and obstructing the view anyone from the street might have of Amy's driver's side door. Amy took a big gulp of the coffee before she started down the stairs. Doug followed nervously. By the time they got to the bottom of the stairs, Amy was swaying slightly on her feet. She started to stumble a bit, but Mike was there and grabbed her by the elbow. Doug had grabbed the coffee from her hand before she had the chance to drop it down in front of herself. Amy had gasped, recognizing Mike, and stammered, What do you want? What's going on, Doug?" Mike had led Amy to her car and whispered something in her ear that Doug couldn't hear. Amy was whimpering and trying to push Mike off of her. Oleg grabbed Doug and demanded the walkie-talkie back. Doug had fished it from his car and given it to him. By then, Amy was backed up against the side of her car, and Mike was standing over her, talking close to the side of her face. She was turning her face, trying to turn away from him. Mike didn't look pleased or calm, as he had up until now. Amy squirmed enough to turn back to Mike, who abruptly grabbed her by the low ponytail at the nape of her neck and smashed her face against the windshield of her car hard enough to crack it. Doug was surprised to see Amy's face didn't even bruise. There was a cut on her forehead, and she was knocked unconscious. Oleg rushed over and grabbed the keys from Amy's bag and handed them to Mike. They put Amy in the back seat, then Mike got in the driver's seat. Oleg had looked at Doug and instructed him to follow them. Doug didn't dare disobey. He had followed them all the way to what he learned was Amy's apartment. Oleg had kept a lookout while Doug helped Mike carry Amy up the 2 flights of stairs to her third-floor unit. It was strange. It had been nearly 6 p.m. on Saturday, and the place seemed deserted. There were hardly even any cars parked in the parking lot. Once Doug and Mike got Amy in her apartment, she started to stir somewhat. Her cat sniffed at her bare feet. Her shoes must have fallen off in the car. Then the cat darted out the door as Oleg came in after them. Doug looked at Mike and said, "I don't want anything else to do with this. I'm leaving." Mike had answered him simply, "That's fine. You've done your part. Now just keep your mouth shut. Don't worry. She'll do the same." Doug had stood frozen for a moment before turning and almost running to his car and driving home. Once he arrived home, he got in the shower and cried as he washed himself over and over, then drank 4 shots of bourbon in succession before laying down on his bed. Now, in the car with Eberly, he truly did feel like a monster. Amy seemed so innocent. What had he done? And why? What was she doing in that line of work anyway? She should have been some mediocre primary school teacher or a baby factory for some tech guru schmuck, not reading tarot and doing woo-woo bullshit with creepy old faggots and mob darlings. Who was this woman anyway to put him in this position? The more he thought about it, the more angry he became. Really, this was all Amy's fault. She probably brought this on him and herself. Shit. He had probably done her a favor yesterday. While Doug was reasoning things out in his head, Eberly was talking on and on about his upcoming deadline and the boring article he was editing. Doug didn't hear a word as he pulled into the parking space on a side street around the corner from Buca. "So I told him my boyfriend was a clinical psychologist and he should give you a call and get a diagnosis," Eberly was saying as Doug pulled the key from the ignition. He snapped his head, turning towards Eberly at hearing these words. "You did what? I don't need any new weirdo clients, Eb." Eberly was caught off guard. He hadn't actually given the jerk Doug's name or contact. He had just been insulting a backward tech asshole. "You haven't been listening to a word I've been saying for the past 10 minutes. Really, Doug, what the fuck is your problem today? Do you want to have brunch or not? I didn't give the fool your contact. I was just insulting him." Eberly watched as Doug angrily grabbed both paper coffee cups and crushed them, looking for a trash receptacle as he exited the vehicle. Eberly watched Doug through the driver's side window as Doug stomped over to a trash can and forcefully threw the paper cups in. Then he calmly unbuckled himself and waited for Doug to come around and open the door for him to get out. Doug opened the door and Eberly got out, stepping past him with his nose in the air, headed for Buca's door. Doug closed the escape's door, locked the vehicle, shoved his hands in his pockets, and followed his partner into the busy restaurant lobby. Eb was already greeting Stephanie with hugs and kisses. Jack was at the hostess stand telling the irritated-looking hostess that the entire party was finally present. Doug scuffed the toe of his campers on the tile floor, waiting to follow the hostess to their table. Jack looked at Doug with disgust and waved hello. Jack and Eberly got along, but the feelings between Jack and Doug were mutual. All Doug wanted was a Bellini and a nap. So, Amy's assault, the way that they assault her, that I was assaulted that way, or in a very similar manner. It wasn't at my car. It was at the Cotton Mill Studios. I was given a drugged drink, and when I woke up the next morning, I had broken blood vessels in my face and blood crusted in the corner of my mouth and cuts up my arm and a big bruise with 2 puncture wounds on my hip. And I was real sick. I was real sick. And I'm still very angry about it. It took me a week to go to the police about it, and they refused to take my statement. They treated me like I was crazy. They asked me if I needed to go see a psychiatrist. They wouldn't even look at the wounds. So in part, this story for me when I was writing it was a way of working out kind of the way I wished things had been treated or handled. But generally, that's not the way things are handled. Generally, when a woman's assaulted, she's treated as though she is the perpetrator. And it's part of what makes this overturn of Roe versus Wade so very, very insulting. The Amy in my story is not Miss Amy Cummy Barrett at all. And I really think that bitch need to check herself.